Hello. We're excited to be here today to spend some time reminiscing about the history, issues, and implications of the movement to stop nuclear weapons, more specifically, Lockheed-Martin and its participation in nuclear weapons development in Santa Cruz County. Many may not know much about this history, and we feel it's important to preserve it and perhaps stimulate discussion about what is next. My name is Jane Weed-Pomerantz. I've lived here for 42 years and have been an environmental, social, and economic justice activist. So I suggest that each one of us introduce ourselves when we begin our part of the chronology. My friends here today have chatted earlier this week about how we'd like to spend this time and agreed that we'd like to present a slice of the continuum of that history of nuclear resistance. And then we'll have a conversation and talk more deeply with each other about things we learned, how we believe these efforts contributed to the quest for human rights, and at the end, we'll finish with a last sort of reflection from each of us. So let's begin. I would like to first suggest that we talk with Phil to learn about his perspective of those very early years. I'll make additions about our efforts from a position of a staff person from the Resource Center for Nonviolence. Phil?
So Phil McManus, and I've lived in Bonnie Doon for 38 years now, and I was on the staff of the Resource Center for Nonviolence for many years. And we began doing work related to the Lockheed facility in the late 70s. I remember hearing about vigils that had happened before I was around, like on Hiroshima or Nagasaki Day, up at the Lockheed facility at the end of Empire Grade Road. But it was in 1978, as I recall, that Lockheed applied for some permits to do a significant expansion of the facility. And we learned about that and decided that we ought to know a little bit more about what was going on up there and about what role our county was actually playing in the nuclear arms race that we all felt so threatened by. So right from the beginning, I think it's important to locate the work that we were doing in the way that we thought about it in terms of thinking globally about the nuclear arms race as a global threat and our responsibility as global citizens, and then acting locally and countering it, facing it in our own community. Right from the beginning, right from very early on, we were part of a national network called the Nuclear Weapons Facilities Task Force. Mm-hmm. I think in 1979, we had a meeting here in Santa Cruz that brought people from at least a couple of dozen communities around the country that were involved in the production of nuclear weapons in one form or another, as a way to, first of all, map it, to understand the map of the nuclear weapons complex, and then secondly, to link together, share information, support each other in trying to bring attention to what was going on in our local communities and into in terms of the broader significance of nuclear weapons policy. So in Santa Cruz, there was a planning commission hearing, as there always is, but it had generated so much interest even before the hearing that the hearing was held at the Vets Hall. And I think, to the surprise of just about everyone, the hall was packed, standing room only, when the hearing opened. And the strategy of the Planning Commission was to limit testimony to local planning law and exclude anything that had to do with nuclear weapons or the nuclear arms race. I should clarify that Lockheed's work on nuclear weapons involved different things, but it involved producing explosive bolts that were used for the separation of the stages of the Trident missile. And the Trident missile carried nuclear weapons. So there was no work being done on nuclear weapons themselves, on the warheads at the Lockheed facility, but they were playing an integral role in the production of the weapons that threatened all life on the planet. So we don't have time to go into that whole very interesting story, but the sheer force of public opinion in that setting forced the Planning Commission to open the testimony more broadly. And by the end of the evening, there was still a long, long line of people that wanted to testify, so another hearing was scheduled. that hearing took place at the Civic Auditorium, and the Civic was not entirely filled, but it was pretty full. And we had another full night of testimony, at the end of which, despite the overwhelming testimony by citizens opposed to this expansion because of what is signified in terms of the nuclear threat, the Planning Commission voted to approve the permit application. So we appealed it to the Board of Supervisors, and another hearing was held, and that also was at the Civic Auditorium, and that also was a full house, and that also was a long evening of very interesting and compelling testimony that I recall included World War II vets talking about how we didn't want another Pearl Harbor and we needed these weapons, and representatives from Lockheed. But again, the large majority of speakers were local citizens deeply concerned about the implications of the arms race and urging our Board of Supervisors to take a principled stand. At the end of the evening...
and moral stand, I will add.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the end of the evening, the vote was taken and the permit application was approved by a 3-2 vote. So that was the end of the local planning process. Lockheed then had the green light to go forward. But in the face of so much concern and opposition locally, we felt that there had to be more that we could do. And that's where we came up with this idea of a ballot initiative that would explicitly prohibit work on nuclear weapons in any shape or form in Santa Cruz County. And that's the ballot initiative that became Measure A.
Measure A.
So that's what we worked on. So the sequence was Planning Commission hearing in 79. I think the 2 hearings were in 79. Maybe the Board of Supervisors as well, although that might have been early 1980. And then the Measure A process was the first 6 months of 1980, culminating in a vote in June of 1980 on that ballot initiative. So that, as far as we know, is the first time that a prohibition on work on nuclear weapons was voted on anywhere by a popular vote anywhere in the United States. We were a small and ragtag band of activists that were doing the organizing without any money. We nonetheless managed to raise something like $30,000 during that campaign. Had bus ads that you've seen in our broadcast here today, and lots of other outreach to the community. But we didn't have the means to really reach people throughout the county. We were able to reach people in the city of Santa Cruz, and in fact, the majority of people in the city of Santa Cruz voted in support of Measure A to prohibit work on nuclear weapons. But the vote in the county was a rather sound defeat of the proposition. Nonetheless, it was a really excellent opportunity to raise awareness about nuclear weapons work, the nuclear arms race, nuclear weapons work locally, and what it meant to all of us as citizens of Santa Cruz and citizens of the world.
Yeah, I mean, that was an amazing time. I was a staff member at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, finishing up my degree in community studies at UC Santa Cruz, and a founding member of People for a Nuclear-Free Future in Santa Cruz. And we were, I mean, I think we felt very righteous and potent. I mean, with nonviolent direct action, lots of very important mobilization had happened. I don't think we felt very capable in terms of prowess at the electoral level, having to circulate petitions to get signatures, adequate enough signatures to put this on the ballot was a major challenge at the time. And I think, however, we began to realize that this was an important outreach tool, that when you're talking to somebody about lending their signature so that there can be a voice from the town square, it became an opportunity to pull them in important ways into the campaign. And I'm very, I mean, we had legal advice, we had people that were coming, every generation was involved in bringing this issue to the fore, and the morality of it, and what were we as local people in Santa Cruz wanting to do about it. So we had door-to-door work, we had lots of events. We did get on the ballot, and if you think about the presidential primary of June 1980, what was happening. I mean, Carter was the going to be the nominee for the Democrats for his second term, and Reagan was stepping up. So it was a very, very amazing time in politics at that time as well. And while I think there were 26,000 ballots cast for Measure A in the city of Santa Cruz, though, as Phil mentioned, we did lose soundly countywide. I think that we planted some very important seeds, and we spent around $30,000, and Lockheed is said to have spent around $250,000, $250,000 to defeat this. So they certainly went full bore, but we all, believing in the cause, rallied a lot of people in the community and felt somewhat victorious that we won in Santa Cruz, even though we had to have won, the county-wide in order to affect this planning effort. So that was not the end. And I think that's an important thing to be thinking about, that even though we may not be a victor in a particular skirmish, that we can carry on and continue the efforts.
Should I talk a little bit about how we carried on?
Okay.
So, or did you have more you wanted to say?
No, that's
there?
it. You're on.
So, so most of my work over the last 30 plus years has been focused on Latin America, but I was doing anti-nuclear work early on and continued doing that up through the mid-'80s. And after the Measure A defeat, we didn't just go home. I mean, we did take some R&R because we were ready for that after that really intense campaign. Mm-hmm. But we continued to do educational work and organizing work locally. And we continued to do leafleting up at the Lockheed facility. There were occasional actions up there, but there were semi-regular leafletings. So, here's an example of the leaflets that we use. This is from 1983, and it's attempting to dialogue with the workers at Lockheed about the implications of our nuclear weapons policy in terms of seeking a first strike capability to be able to wipe out the Soviet nuclear forces without facing retaliation, which we thought was complete insanity, mm-hmm. and was typically denied in the political discourse in this country, but at certain points it did break through into the media. So we would take advantage of that to go up and hand out leaflets to the workers there and try to get in some dialogue with them. And, most people wouldn't talk to us. Some people were rude. Some people were very principled in believing in what they were doing, and were happy to talk to us about that. And some people would say, I'm with you, and I've got a kid I'm trying to put through college, and, I feel stuck in this, and that's just the way. So anyway, it was an interesting experience. That was one integral piece that we tried to be faithful to over all those years. In about 1984, Lockheed came back to the county to seek another permit for expansion. So we started the whole thing all over again of opposing that. And on that occasion, when it got to the Planning Commission and we turned out a big crowd and had a big public hearing with lots of testimony against the permit application because of its implications in terms of the nuclear arms race, the vote was called, and we expected another 3-2 vote based on the politics of the members of the Board of Supervisors and their appointees to the Planning Commission. But to our surprise, the appointee of one of the conservative members of the Board of Supervisors announced in the moment of the vote that he was going to vote against the permit application because we'd brought up a lot of environmental issues to try to give them a basis for turning down the permit. But he said, he wasn't really worried about the trees up there. What he was worried about was the future of the human race, and that we had to do something to confront that, and so he was going to vote against this permit. So he did. It was defeated. He resigned the next day. Lockheed appealed the application to the Board of Supervisors, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on that history because what I remember happening in the end, what I remember happening in the end was, in fact, I think this is the way it went. Instead of appealing it, what Lockheed decided to do was, let's not have any more public discussion about this. Mm-hmm. Let's build this facility, this building that we want, on the naval property, which is not subject to local jurisdiction. And that's what they did. And that's the last time that, to my knowledge, that a planning issue, a planning permit application from Lockheed has come before the local government.
And that would have been because they could put it onto the land that was owned by the Navy.
Yeah.
It's thereby federal and completely untouchable by the local citizenry, which is interesting because as we hand off this torch to the later years, I had taken time, and I think it's important for all of us to find balance in our lives, to have our first child, and was involved in still continuing to try to close or not allow Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant to operate, and work on alternative energy, because I think that being hopeful about something in the future was really an important counter dose to the threat of nuclear annihilation. And in 1983, I ran for city council because we wanted to implement a very broad plan for energy self-sufficiency and conservation in the city of Santa Cruz. Energy Future Santa Cruz was actually countywide as well. And so I ran for office, and then because thinking globally and acting locally was so important as we moved forward, to be realizing that we're global citizens here, and the time was just right to consummate a sister city relationship in Alushta in the Crimean Peninsula in the USSR, in the Soviet Union, that I went there as mayor in 1986-87. And what I starkly remember from that trip was the countless public presentations that we would be at. We were always asked the question about why didn't the U.S. government respond in kind when the Soviet Union had an 18-month moratorium on any nuclear weapons testing or production? Why didn't we take up that as a sign of responsible global citizenry and looking at things differently? And I had no good answer for that. All I could say was that we appreciate their working for that, and that we would return and continue to carry on with our efforts to be heard from the village square. So it was a very important time, and I think people were watching from everywhere to see where it would go. Would you like to carry on?
Well, no, that's interesting that we get all that out there.
Tell us who you are.
My name is Maile McGrew-Frede, formerly Maile Pickett, and I arrived in Santa Cruz in 1988 as a freshman UCSC student, and one of the first things that I remember experiencing was a runner from an action at Lockheed coming to one of my core courses at college and reporting on this amazing thing that was going on, where people were sitting in the road and getting arrested at Lockheed in order to prevent workers from going to work and contributing to the production of Trident 2D5 first strike nuclear weapons that are meant to be submarine launched and therefore are capable of starting a nuclear war. We're no longer in the mutually assured destruction mad strategy of, if you kill our cities, we'll kill your cities. This is a different evolution of the nuclear model we were learning. And first strike, submarine launch, means you can get close to a hardened target in the Soviet Union and potentially use that threat to knock out their missiles before they can launch them. So this seemed like a crisis and like an escalation of where we had been before. You know, I came from the island of Honolulu. I grew up in Hawaii, and we were, as high school kids, we were all very familiar with mutually assured destruction. We had Pearl Harbor right there, and you know, we used to talk about whose roof we would go sit on, you know, to watch the end of the world. So it wasn't a new thing to learn about nuclear weapons, but to learn about first strike, and then to realize that in this peaceful, amazing town that I had come to, with people singing on the corners, and that nuclear weapons were parts for nuclear weapons. As you said, they weren't building the warheads, but they were building the re-entry vehicles which guided the first strike weapons to their targets. To learn that was happening right up the road, it was pretty world changing, and And then I remember watching my first action, and I've lost touch with her, but I remember seeing a friend, Alex Perkins, sitting in the road and singing as cops in police in riot gear came up and put her in a pain compliance hold because she didn't walk. You know, she didn't get up and walk, so she was resisting arrest. And so they put her in a pain compliance hold, and she tried to keep singing, and it was life-changing to see that. And so I got involved. I think that this period of activism actually started a year or two before me. I believe Peter Lumsdaine was crucial in calling statewide activists to participate in a first strike prevention project. And so the first few actions, and it seems like I didn't know a lot of the previous history of the legislative effort to stop Lockheed, but it seems like a natural outgrowth of, we tried the legislative method, we tried to go by, you know, the law and using, you know, the democratic structures that we have in place, and that isn't working, and weapons of mass destruction are being built in our backyard. And so activists wanted to take it to the next level and took inspiration from the civil rights movement, civil disobedience, putting your body in harm's way in order to make a point. And so this was a bodily sitting in the road, preventing workers from getting to work in the morning, and trying to stop business as usual in that way. And so the first few actions were blockading, and then you're seeing pictures on the screen right now from a spring action in 1989, May 24th of 1989. In which it became a trespass action. So this action took place at the Lockheed facility a little later in the morning, so no blockading happened, but instead a rally took place at the gates with speakers and music and groups from all over town. And then it culminated in about 100 activists jumping over the fence and spreading out across the facilities at Lockheed. So basically a land reclamation, saying, you know, we need to celebrate life rather than create ways to end it. That action had a lot of participation from a lot of different groups in town. It had speakers like Mike Rotkin calling folks to jump the fence with him. I don't think Mike was mayor at that time. I think it was in between, but there's Mike Rotkin giving a speech at the rally site. So this era was marked by a kind of we were all pretty young. We were connected culturally. I think Barbara Epstein has a great book called I don't remember the full title, Direct Action Politics and Cultural Revolution. It's something like that, because this era was really about sort of doing things different from the bottom up, kind of enacting how people relate together in groups in different ways. We used consensus process. We had affinity groups. We often lived in communal houses. There's the Gaia House Affinity Group meeting in the street. And it was really about sort of changing who we are, I think, trying to sort of reconstruct subjectivity itself rather than only just going towards the one goal of stopping the production of nuclear weapons. So on this day that most of these pictures are from, I and another student, Elisa Socio, actually, Lisa is responsible for most of these photos, and we participated in this action and then also documented it for one of our UCSC classes, social documentation. So that's where most of these photos are from. I think that this era went on for another 2 years or so. It wasn't a very long period, but this particular action resulted in about 83 arrests, and when folks were given different charges based on some being organizers and some being participants, activists opted to stay in jail for a full 3 days and to try to protest the differential in charges. and then there were a few of us who actually refused probation because we wanted to be able to continue to demonstrate. And so I ended up, along with 3 other women and 4 men, serving a short sentence in Blaine Street. I was sentenced to 42 days in Blaine Street, and I served 25. So it was a formative experience. It changed the way I thought about a lot of things, not just the arms race, but also our criminal justice system and how dissent is managed by systems like that. So I think that's where I'll end for this at this moment.
Okay, Lynda,
Well,
tell us.
I'm Lynda Marin, and my home has been in Bonnie Doon since 1989. I began without knowledge about all of this history when we got involved in the kind of focusing on Lockheed-Martin. And it started at the ramp up to the Iraq War. And so in March of 2003, and when we were at a training at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, a number of us quickly agreed that while we didn't think there were probably any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, we knew for sure that there were weapons of mass destruction all over the United States, and because we had so many weapons manufacturing sites all over the United States, and particularly Lockheed-Martin as the premier weapons manufacturer. So we were concerned that, and we very well knew, because we lived in Bonnie Doon and because those Lockheed-Martin trucks would go back and forth unmarked, but we knew where they were going. And so we joined together first as a group that wanted to find out now, at this point in history, what was going on behind the gates of Lockheed-Martin. So it was very much a similar impulse that all of the other groups had as well. We wanted to know what kinds of weaponry or what kinds of parts were being made there. We had heard that they were making contained detonating fuses, and we wanted to know what that entailed and what kind of environmental impact that might be having on the water supply and on the earth and to the wildlife. You know, we were concerned about a whole range of things. But our first act really was just to march to Lockheed-Martin and ask them, let us in, we want to talk to you. And that was really our major impulse all the way through the 5 years that we were organized. Please let us know what you're doing. We'd like to have a conversation with you. So the first marches entailed we wanted to get the community involved. There were maybe about 10 to 14 of us, but we wanted a bigger voice. So we also did what we called weapons inspections. And what we did was we chose venues where there would be a sympathetic crowd and where we could inspect for weapons of mass destruction. So we used a costume that allowed us to have some legitimacy as a weapon inspector. So we actually used painters' outfits, but we adorned them with the anti-nuclear radioactive alarm logo. And we also had a badge, a very important official badge that allowed us entry. And we went to Long's drugstore. Do you remember Long's before it became? Mm-hmm. And I don't know what this device actually is really for, but it, and this is the original battery in it. It might not be very loud, but we would make sure that people were, and there were different sounds that it made to be, so as we could tell if someone was actually weapon-free.
Yeah.
And if they were, the comfort of being given a sticker.
Oh, thank goodness.
Oh, you're radiation free.
Yes, WMD free.
Okay.
So we did that in a number of places. This is what you see on the screen right now is a presentation at the Rio Theater by Daniel Ellsberg, where we did a weapons inspection. And we did that all over the city. We did it on Pacific Garden Mall. We chose our venues to maximize the possibility of the public being informed. because really what we wanted to tell people is that there is a Lockheed-Martin at the end of Empire Grade. So we were always handing out quarter sheets, colorful quarter sheets, to let them know why we were focusing on Lockheed-Martin and what really the purpose of the Santa Cruz Weapons Inspection Team was. Now, but, you know, one thing leads to another, as, you know, you have said as well. So besides the marches and demonstrations, we joined with other groups because there was always a bigger movement going on, you know, whether it was very visible or not. And there were certain times when that happened. So, for instance, we joined with the Vandenberg actions, and we also joined up with the Tri-Valley Cares Livermore actions on Hiroshima Day. We were arrested there. And we found ourselves then somewhat in charge. We took charge of, for about 4 years, our own Santa Cruz commemorations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki days. And what those usually included was we had a press conference usually, and we invited many groups to come, and many groups did come. And for instance, in our 2005, what we called Remembering Hiroshima, we invited and had people coming from, well, we had children coming from the Jane Addams Peace Camp. We had the Pacific Yearly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers. And then the Junior Yearly Meeting was also here in Santa Cruz, so they came too. The Raging Grannies attended, Earth Justice Ministries, Santa Cruz branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, otherwise known as WILF. We had the Nuclear Abolition Committee, and we had Art and Revolution. So we always try to include as many other groups as possible, because our purpose really was to help the word get out that we had a nuclear weapons facility in Santa Cruz County, and what did we think about that, and what did we want to do about that. And finally, in 2005, early in 2005, we joined up with the Rural Bonnie Doon Association, because we decided to take a particularly environmental slant for that particular purpose. And because we were still trying to get a meeting with Lockheed-Martin. You know, we'd been trying for 3 years.
Heck, you were neighbors.
Yes, and that's it. In fact, we often said good neighbors talk to each other. That was one of the signs that we would hold at the vigils at Lockheed-Martin. And so the Rural Bonnie Doon Association became a little bit interested when we started talking about the watershed and about Trident Lake, which you know, is on that 4,400 acre parcel that is Lockheed-Martin at the end of Empire Grade. And because it had been operating since in the mid-1950s, and since there had been no environmental regulation until the mid-1980s, we were concerned that there may be all kinds of contaminants in the ground. We didn't know how they were managing and handling those liquids and solvents and materials, the hazardous materials that go with that industry. We were also concerned about how fire might be addressed there, because those things are especially flammable. And up until a certain point, Lockheed-Martin had a fire team on site, but that had been disbanded many years before. And local fire departments, volunteer fire departments, were supposed to know where all of the dangerous liquids were being stored in the underground storage tanks and the above ground storage tanks. So we engaged the Rural Bonnie Doon Association to help us ask Lockheed-Martin those questions. And finally, in September 2005, we did have a meeting with them. And they gave us a PowerPoint presentation, and it was a kind of a cell of what a good neighbor Lockheed-Martin is, and what the wonderful things are that they do. And they did acknowledge that they may contain detonating fuses, but that everything else was absolutely, completely safe, and they'd never had Environmental health had never had any complaints about anything that they had ever done. And it turned out, we found out that the same environmental health employee had been going every single year to the facility to do the check, to run the checklist, and that they were very good friends with Lockheed-Martin. And so we found out, those things that which you might expect, but were disappointing, and yet we pushed on. One of the things that we really tried to do in that incarnation, and I should say we called ourselves at that time, or that branch of us was called CCALM, which was Citizens Concerned About Lockheed-Martin. So we had a different website, and we were really focusing on the environmental issues there. And a major thing that we wanted them to do was test the water. Because we suspected there was beryllium and various other kinds of traces, of metals, heavy metals and dangerous toxins. And we also tried to get the people who were downstream from them to enter into the quest for this information. And it was disappointing to find that some of those people really didn't want to know what was in the water, but we still did. So we continued to try. We failed to get them to actually test the water. And so at one point, we had friends in funny places, I will say that. And one of them was someone who lived nearby Lockheed-Martin and knew some ways to get to Trident Lake anyway. So one day, a couple of us went to Trident Lake and got some water samples. And it was a very complicated ordeal trying to get that water tested. And so we weren't entirely successful. We felt as though we had learned a lot in the process of capturing water for testing of that nature, but we weren't able to actually test it to our satisfaction. But nevertheless, we continued to try things which brought the attention always back to the fact that we had a Lockheed Martin, and we really ought to be rather concerned about it. I remember one of my favorite projects was we did Lockheed Martin and the Four Directions. And so what we did is we made signs to show which way to Lockheed Martin, and we put them all over Santa Cruz County.
Oh, okay.
So that people could know that they were in some direction, they could get to Lockheed Martin sooner than later. All right. So I think I'll leave it there, and there's lots of other things I know we can all contribute. Yeah.
Thank you, Lynda. Maile. Phil, I think things have bubbled up about, wow, this has been an amazing chronology and continuum, and there's certainly a lot of implications for now, but maybe as you presented or in your thinking this week, what kinds of things would you like us to chew on in conversation?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the context that motivated us to focus on this work. At one point, we did a series of actions up at Lockheed under the theme of 4 billion hostages. This was in 1980. It was in the context of the Iran hostage crisis. And we certainly felt that all of us, human beings, were being held hostage by the nuclear arms race. And we agree here about that threat, but it wasn't just the fact that we felt threatened by the politics of it, but we also felt motivated by our responsibility under international law. The work on these nuclear weapons is illegal. So we tried to learn about that and then to share what we learned. We all remember the Nuremberg principles after the war crimes trials after World War II that established that it's not enough to say I was just following orders. But another one of the principles says that the fact that domestic law does not punish an act which is an international crime does not free the perpetrator of that crime from responsibility under international law. So nuclear weapons production was legal under the laws of the United States, except that law that said U.S. law is subservient to the international law that the U.S. is a party to. So in that regard, there's a lot of things that you could cite. There was a UN Security Council, or excuse me, a General Assembly resolution in 1961 that articulated the sense of the international community in this regard, and that talked about the use of nuclear weapons and even the scope of war would exceed the scope of war and cause indiscriminate suffering and destruction. It's a war directed not against the enemy or enemies alone, but also against all mankind, as it was put in those days. Any state using nuclear weapons is to be considered as violating the Charter of the UN, as acting contrary to the laws of humanity, and as committing a crime against humanity and civilization. So that's a quote from that resolution. We have a responsibility not just to say we don't agree with this, but to actually act to stop it. And that responsibility was underscored in bright letters by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that was agreed to in 1968 and signed by the U.S. And as we know, one of the provisions of that treaty was that each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to the cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. So the United States was leading the arms race from the point at which it first developed the first atomic weapon up until today. Technologically, it's far ahead of what was the Soviet Union or what is Russia now or any of the other nuclear powers. Far from trying to effectively end the scourge of nuclear weapons, the United States has consistently throughout its history pushed that arms race forward.
The proliferation, yeah.
Right. Well, and we're the only nation which has actually used them in an act of war.
Right.
And refuses up till today to renounce their first use in a future conflict. So I wanted to just emphasize that it wasn't just the way that we felt threatened by the politics of it, but the responsibility that we felt under international law to act to stop the arms race.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted, what you were saying about the Nuremberg, we were also very aware of the Nuremberg principles and tried to use them when our trials came up. So particularly for the blockading actions, folks were often cited and released for time served because they didn't want people gumming up the court system and the jail system, which was very overcrowded at the time. But for the trespass action, I think there was some decision made on the part of law enforcement, enough is enough, we have to really discourage this, this is crazy, there's 83 people getting arrested. So those trials, which were all handled by Ray Grunick, who was a very amazing lawyer at the time, and who is probably a saint, handled all 83 of those cases and tried to work with each group individually. Everyone got slightly different charges, despite our attempt to try to get the same charges for everyone. And he worked with us, and those of us that tried to take it to trial and use Nuremberg principles to say, you know, Nuremberg allows a lesser crime to be committed in defense of a greater crime. And we tried to use that in court, and it was always thrown out. You were limited to simply, did you trespass or did you not trespass?
That's the court system.
And that was very, I mean, it's not surprising at this age, but at age 18, that was very.
What? How can you say that? It's so directly linked.
It was radicalizing. it was like, wow, this is really not about what's right or wrong. This is about whether this one small, rule has been breached.
The rules of
and
evidence.
there's no leeway for looking at the larger picture or the context or, what's ultimately responsibility for our community in a given moment.
I think the world looks at us And once, because we are the major proliferator, we have used them before, and we are the one that continues to produce them and even work with our quote-unquote allies in getting them. And so it's a speaking with forked tongues, but the world is looking at us as citizens and saying, what? You know, you're a democracy, don't you have any say there? And so that's been sort of the conundrum that we've all been finding ourselves in, is how do you affect this change, and how can you say, yes, I am a global citizen as well as a U.S. citizen, and I think we have to continue with our voices.
I think, too, what we're up against in that is the enormous profitability of this industry and the ways in which that profit allows it to be positioned really very much like a shadow government, that in the sense that it allows, in fact, it's just included in all kinds of foreign affairs and State Department kinds of decisions. There are people who are positioned in the weapons industry who give counsel, you know, to these bodies. And you know, they're not counseling to end war. You know, it's quite the opposite message. So, and that's a simplification, but the fact is that, like Lockheed-Martin, while we're concerned about the weapons of mass destruction that it creates, and we all are, the power that it has politically is an entirely other level of oppression, actually, that we all experience, whether we're seeing it directly or feeling it indirectly.
That's a sobering reality check. And I think it's important for us to take stock where we are right now.
And maybe what you're saying sort of leads into sort of the larger problem that is before us today. I mean, I felt mixed about making this show because I'm both proud of my past, but I also wonder to what extent focusing on the issue of weapons of mass destruction is the right issue for today. Because what you were saying about the profit motive, in a sense, the profit motive, our economy is kind of our weapon of mass destruction today. We are on a course of destroying the atmosphere and source of all life through our economy. I mean, Naomi Klein really makes that point quite saliently in This Changes Everything, her latest book, where it's this issue was. We're making these things, and we still have them in the world. The Trident IIs are still out there on the submarines. Right. But it would take a lot of checks and balances, well, one hopes, not just a coffee cup sitting down on the button, but a big failure of many different. It would take a crisis and then a failure of all of the checks and balances that are supposed to prevent nuclear weapons being used in a crisis for a global destruction from nuclear weapons to happen. But with the economic consumptive economy, which is basically using up all of our natural resources and destroying our atmosphere, that's just sort of, we'll just keep doing what we're doing.
So
It doesn't take a crisis.
Yeah.
Can I chime in on this?
Yeah.
You were questioning whether it's the issue to focus on, and I think that's certainly a very good question. It's not the issue that I am personally focused on, although I do think it's an issue that's important for us to track. And I highly recommend Tri-Valley Cares in Livermore as a great way of keeping in touch with what's going on around this issue. They do excellent ongoing documentation and intervention around nuclear policy issues. But two comments. One is that there is a real threat in terms of proliferation, that some of the military strategy heavyweights are really jumping up and down about and saying, we have to be paying more attention to this. What's the guy's name? It's Bill Perry, right? He recently wrote a book about this. And we can't do a very good job on controlling proliferation given the hypocrisy of our position of continuing to pursue not just holding these weapons, but their modernization. And that's the other comment. The United States is now embarked on, according to what I've been reading, 30-year, $1 trillion modernization program, as though the nuclear weapons that we have, that have to destroy the world many times over, are not adequate going into the future. So that's an incredible opportunity cost. Destabilizing, yes, but opportunity cost in terms of dealing with climate change and the other issues that are facing us. So I think it may not be the focus that we put all of our attention into, but we can't ignore it either.
What I'm struck with your comments is that everything is interconnected.
It's so interconnected.
And in the last 25 years, the increasing use of technology, social media, all of these kinds of things are both they're threats and they're incredible opportunities. Climate change is definitely before us, and if we keep sending all of our treasure to plan for and execute the next war or modernize our weapons, what are we thinking? Because if you look at our nation's infrastructure or the world's need for clean water, education, so it seems to me we're coming up to a very, very important juncture. And I think that having voices be loud and clear about the interconnection of the issues and then the people are really going to be important, because the Sanders efforts in this campaign, the illumination of the fact of corporate control, I think all of this fits into that same dialogue. And we have only 5 minutes more left, but I really think this has been fruitful, and we're curious if there's other things you want to explore quickly.
Wrap-up comments?
Well, I'd like to just jump off what you said, Jane, because I so entirely agree. And I know that sometimes I talk to people, I feel this way myself. I don't know where to put my energy. There's so many things that I feel are absolutely important. Like one day it's GMOs and another day it's the climate. But the truth is, I choose one thing, and I really put my energy there. That's where my passion goes. And I thank, from the bottom of my heart, each person for being the me who is working on that other issue, because they are all equally important and they work together. And so were someone to wish to work on nuclear weapons, they would have my wholehearted support and any kind of advice, experience I could lend. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a pitch for what we can do in the remaining months of the Obama administration. Apparently there's some conversation going on within the administration about what he can do using executive action. And some obvious things would be to renounce first use. That would be an important milestone in the history of U.S. nuclear weapons policy. Another thing would be to take the nuclear weapons off of the so-called hair trigger to reduce the possibility of an accidental war. And then a $1 trillion modernization program, Obama, who pledged to work for the elimination of nuclear weapons, certainly he can take some action to, I know there's the bureaucracy that's pushing that, but he can take some action to impede the progress of that bureaucracy down a path that we really don't want to go.
I'm thinking about the important thing is that the seeds have been planted all along the way. The budget says moral documents. What are our priorities as a people and a nation? How do we interrelate with other people around the world? And I'm thinking the value of the inspection teams. That meant that we revealed the Bush administration's lie about why they had gone to war. So I think that in that we have hopefully planted the seeds for more activism wherever that can be, and seeking balance and making the demands at different levels and working together, shoulder to shoulder. Did you have a...
Well, Miley, you're the one who hasn't really spoken in this last round.
I didn't mean to imply that there's only one issue that of course it's all interconnected. And in fact, if we did start to reweave the fabric of how our economic transactions are made, that would change a lot of things that have to do with how weapons of mass production are produced. It would probably be part and parcel of preventing this kind of situation from continuing. So it's not, there's no one issue. I didn't mean to imply that there was, but I think, I do think that there's it's probably not the right issue to start in the last 5 minutes, but I do think there's an us-themism in traditional activist circles and ways of thinking. And I think that what we have to get to in the next wave of activism is seeing that we're all one. And I think that's maybe the link back to the humanity and the human rights issue, is that those guys that work at Lockheed, those guys that are in the military, the man making the decision about when to use a nuclear weapon, we're all human, and we're all actually have a lot of the same values. And somehow, if we can form our politics in such a way that we're including thought about that, I don't know what the answer is, but
well, I think you're right. There needs to be finding ways that we can find commonality, and maximizing the strengths and minimizing the weaknesses until
connecting at a deeper value level somehow that gets beyond the political dichotomies that get drawn and the fences. And
don't you think? I have faith, and I'm always an optimist in this. But I believe that human rights is taking on a whole new. I mean, the Declaration of Human Rights covers all of the critical areas, and now we're looking at rights to marry, we're looking at rights to know who you are personally in terms of your gender, the rights of citizens no matter their color or religious background. And so human rights, I think it's a great place to jump off and bring everybody into the common circle. So I want to thank you all, Lynda, Maile, and Phil, for being with us. And thank you for joining us for Human Rights Here Now.